your virtual newsroom for telecom professionals. I'm Dean Perrine, and welcome to JSA TV. This is our second in a series of roundtable discussions that JSA will be releasing this year leading up to our Telecom Exchange event taking place on June 24th in New York City. And a quick note before we begin that this roundtable, as well as our upcoming spots, are being broadcast via a new video broadcast technology that allows JSA to take live feeds from anywhere around the world simultaneously, thanks to our friends at BCS Global and their stellar video application. That's VIDYO application. The webcast is best viewed on Google Chrome desktop browser. And with that, I'd like to say hello to the folks that are actually watching us via the live video stream. I understand that we have a sold-out house today, so that's awesome. And it's probably best that we get started now. So let's do it. Today we're going to be discussing trends in optical transport 2015 to 2020 and beyond. And I am now honored to introduce our three distinguished panelists. They are Mr. Dean Campbell. Dean is the Chief Technology Officer at LightRiver Technologies. LightRiver's proprietary factory-built network process brings next-generation solutions to mission-critical networks by migrating legacy optical networks. And then sandwiched right here in the middle is my friend Roy Hirst. Roy is the Director of Marketing at XKL. XKL explores and develops optical networks for data communications. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Charlie Reed. Charlie is a partner at Atlantic-ACM. As many of you know, Atlantic-ACM is a leading strategic advisory firm to the telecom and technology sectors. Gentlemen, welcome to JSA TV. All right, guys, we're gonna get started. I'll ask the first question and direct it to each of you individually. So here we go. Optical transport is expected to grow significantly in the coming years. What do you see as the growth drivers in 2015, and where do you see those growth drivers going, say, over the next 5 years? And I'll throw that at you first, Dean.
Oh, thanks, Dean. I think we hear in almost every conversation people talking about the cloud these days. We see a number of companies whose major part of their revenue streams, or actually their only revenue stream, is coming in through internet access, through the web itself. And a number of these companies are in competitive marketplaces, are working against startups every day that are looking to take away market share. And we see, huge advantage to a number of these companies that can control their customer experience better, that can provide additional capability in their applications like security. So we see these guys now looking at the internet and the truly critical nature of it, and doing the equation: how much more revenue does an investment in building a private network really generate for them in order to get their content, their services closer or directly to the customer? We see a huge number of these guys looking to actually build private networks to deliver massive amounts of data and services close to the customer, as close as they can get it, bypassing the internet these days. Basically what we see developing is really the framework, the infrastructure for the internet for business, basically, as opposed to kind of the internet for consumer, the internet for sharing that's been prevalent over the last couple of years.
Excellent, Dean. Thank you very much. And Roy, your turn.
I love these questions about the future of things. It's like the future of the climate. You think, yeah, is the Earth warming up? Yeah, sure, it's warming up. I bet it is. But it doesn't really affect me. And then next week, Hurricane Katrina takes out your data center. I think discussions about the future of optical transport, where it's headed, I don't think they should be based so much on how much more video we're going to be doing or whether it's going to be ultra high density video. We should look at what's happening now. And what we're seeing is that backbones between data centers are much, much more loaded than you think they're going to be. Some people have said about 100 times. There are different things happening on the internet now. As Dean Campbell said, it's the internet for business. Business does things differently than it did even 5 years ago. Some of those data models are really complex, and there are virtual servers everywhere, but they're all putting real data loads on the net. And so we're finding that the backbones between data centers are busier than they need to be, and peaks happen faster. It's not enough to know that volume of optical transport is going up by 10%. It could go up 50% for you next Wednesday. That's it.
Excellent, Roy. Thank you very much. And Charlie, you're the last one for this question.
Great. I guess I'd echo some of the sentiments made before about bandwidth growth. Obviously, we're seeing huge growth in video and all kinds of transport on the internet side, but certainly on the business side, between data centers for those big content companies like Google's and Facebook's, the amount of traffic they're pushing across the network is huge. And then on the business side, having those direct connections and building, maybe sometimes buying dark fiber and building their own optical transport networks between these data centers is driving a lot of growth. And then another big trend that's driving the optical transport side is the migration, which obviously we've been seeing for a while. And there's a lot of distance to go when you look at just the type of transport that businesses and carriers are buying. It's still about half legacy transport. So there's a lot of distance to go there, and that'll drive a lot of the new optical transport spend, which will continue to grow in the next couple of years.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. All right. On the supply side, we see more flexible and dynamic hardware, services, and technologies. Can you tell us how you see this equipment evolving over the next couple of years? We'll start with you, Roy.
Well, in the corridor behind me, we have engineers working on transport systems for the next 5 years or so. So I could probably open the door and go and ask them. What we're seeing right now is a focus on flexibility. Flexibility, not particularly bandwidth. I don't know if you've been noticing, but we've been noticing with horror that there are a lot of cloud outages still. And when a cloud outage happens, it's very public. It's a little discouraging. But when you look at those cloud outages, half of them are to do with the management of networks, the inability to upgrade, the inability to change real significant configurations without taking stuff out of service. If you take stuff out of service on an online network, it's not really a good thing and not good for business. So we're seeing people asking for a lot more flexibility. Flexibility of clients to add to transport, flexibility of bandwidth on the line, flexibility driven by software. And of course, one of us has to say SDN at some point. So I'm going to say SDN. This is my chance to say SDN. But I would say in a nutshell, things haven't been all that flexible. They need to be much more flexible. We can't go to these higher bandwidths with the lack of manageability, the relative lack of manageability that we've had in the past. So flexibility is my key for this.
Excellent. Thank you, Roy. How about you, Charlie?
I guess I'll second on the buzzword of SDN that clearly the trend on the supply side is the programmability and the functionality in the network that's really improving and really what customers are demanding. If you look at the initiatives by AT&T, what some of the content players are doing in-house, they're enabling that flexibility. And when they look at a situation where bandwidth is tripling and doubling or tripling, but the amount they're spending on their network can't increase that much because the revenue is only going up a couple percentage points, if at all. They're looking for ways for savings, and they're really going to try to see that in the operations and really enabling that functionality. And a lot of the equipment players are, despite maybe not making a lot of revenue with some of their SDN software plays, they have to have a good story behind it, and they're really pushing hard to push it forward, but it will take a while for that to get embedded in the network.
Thank you, Charlie. And Dean, on the wrap-up for this question?
I think I'm going to third that motion, and I think it'll be carried now, that SDN is one of the things we want to talk about. I'm actually kind of really excited about this latest generation of hardware. We've spent last 10, 15 years in kind of successive generations of hardware trying to get to the holy grail of having a provisionable, agile network. There's a whole bunch of buzzwords there that you'll get from the manufacturers. But one, functionally, where you don't have to roll trucks and people, install new equipment, change optics, do all sorts of physical changes to your network in order to change the provisioning, to bring customers on, to add circuits or add capacity. We're finally at that spot. The capability is really there, although somewhat still costly to get true total flexibility. And now we see the manufacturers turning to the next level, which is how do we add value to the network? How do we actually make the network intelligent? How do we make it responsive to our needs and its own needs? How can we build business applications on top of the network to actually automate, reduce operational costs, make the network more responsive to outages, as Roy was talking about, or just basic demands of the business, new customers coming on and leaving. That's the whole SDN. Some of the NFV movement is really looking toward how do you make the network more functional, more capable, and therefore more valuable. We see that as one of the key trends in hardware development. Actually, we've noticed over the last couple of years the manufacturers seem to be almost factoring now their development in terms of products, whereas the last couple of years we're really focused on collapsing the network stack and including multiple technologies and single platforms. Now we're seeing much more focus on programmatic interfaces, on building better devices that are manageable by other applications and therefore more valuable. In the software world, that's factoring the technology to make it reassemblable and more in creative uses and make it more valuable.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. On to the next question. On the demand side, we see various verticals and regions adopting the use of high-capacity applications. What new or existing verticals do you see having more interest in the evolution of optical transport? And Charlie, we'll start with you.
Great. Well, we mentioned before bandwidth demand from all of the consumer and business verticals is really driving a lot of that demand in the core network. But when you look at some of the types of verticals that are specifically looking for needing the high bandwidth layer 2 transport, we see education is one of the big ones. That they're more interested in some of the other verticals in buying dark fiber for their metro networks. So we see that driving a lot of bandwidth for sort of campus and between location type of transport. We see medical as well, with those regional networks needing a lot of transports for what they're trying to do with digital records and images, etc. On the content side, so that's a long time been a player of this market, and that is continuing to increase. We see these content players like Google and the others look more and more like carriers, and they're building their own networks. They're buying dark fiber, and they're leading the way in a lot of cases on really purchasing these 100 gig transport and these really 100 gig circuits. On the wholesale side, wireless is a big one. I mean, when you talk about wireless towers, that's not as big of a space traditionally for the optical transport, but it's moving more and more as these wireless players plan their traffic and purchase more and more dark fiber, led a lot by Verizon. They're looking at doing 1 gig or 10 gig to the towers, and then maybe 100 gigs between aggregation points in the future. So we see them as a big player. And then finally, the carriers as a whole, we see a lot of 100 gig transport, driven by these optical transport switches, really taking hold from a sales point of view. This has been in discussion for a long time. A lot of carriers input in their core, but they haven't been selling a lot of circuits. Now we see that, sales in the hundreds of circuits if you talk to XO or Level 3. And a lot of that's driven by content and just other carriers improving their backbones, because there's these improvements that need to continue to happen on the carrier side. So I'll pass along. I think that covers most of the key verticals on that demanding a lot of this transport.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. How about you, Dean? What's your thoughts?
I think we're seeing a lot of the same things that Charlie is seeing. Finance has been a traditional player in the optical networking world because of their data requirements, their disaster recovery, business continuity type of requirements. We're seeing some new efforts, new initiatives in the financial space, mainly around some of the consumer, banking, consumer financial type of services, and that's touching back on that kind of security, private networking. So we're seeing some builds there. Healthcare, likewise, started in the optical space based around the electronic records. What we're seeing a lot of right now is really interesting is in the research and development side in the healthcare space. Huge data sets being generated by drug development, by genomic research, being able to transfer, huge packages of data that describe a genome or a sequence for a new drug or whatever. So we're seeing some significant development worldwide in those type of players in healthcare. Charlie touched on social media. Those guys are flush with cash and are building out every day to try to maintain their market share. And then you can mention all the big players. You can mention all the Googles, the Facebooks. They're all building and looking for ways to get closer and closer to their customers. The interesting thing to us is the breadth of demand for new optical networks. We're really seeing it spark up in some of the consumer segments we haven't seen before. Guys who are not traditionally used to buying telco services where they might wait 8 weeks for a T1. These guys are really looking at building out networks at as fast as they can. They're talking in terms of metro and regional and national networks in weeks instead of months. So it's much more of a business of an internet time frame rather than traditional telco time frame for a lot of the new people in the industry. So it's quite an interesting time to be building, and we're seeing broad-based demand across all industries.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. And Roy, to wrap up the question?
Sure. I'd echo what Dean has just said about what I call big data, the pharmaceutical stuff, the healthcare stuff, all of that. If you've got it on your doorstep, it's overwhelming, and people forget that big files take a big time to transmit. That is a huge driver. I also get to say another buzzword, the Internet of Things, which my manager asked me this morning, what are we doing about the Internet of Things? And I changed the subject. And I actually think the Internet of Things is going to get really big because there's an awful lot of things. I'm a marketing guy. So that is still to come, though right now it's plant control, remote access to sensors. It's fairly predictable things. Nonetheless, there's a huge groundswell of sheer volume of data that may well come through, and us poor optical transport guys have got to do something about it. I'm just thinking that maybe the golden age, when most of the capacity evolution was driven by telcos, maybe is drawing to a close, because all of the things that we're looking at, the big data and the Internet of Things, we feel are going to be internet driven. We're looking not at just at 100 gig, we're looking at 100 GE, 400 GE, as a sort of a theme. I mean, that's no surprise to anybody. I just wanted to say we're really focused on 100 GE interfaces this year, mostly because of the rise of business rather than the Internet of Things. But next year, if I'm still in this job, could be the Internet of Things.
Excellent. Thank you, Roy. We're moving on to the next question, guys. What major geographies, North America, Asia, Pacific, Europe, or the rest of the world, do you predict will drive the most growth? I'm going to ask that question, and then any other final predictions that you might have would be a good time. Now would be a good time to talk about those. And we'll start with Dean. Go ahead.
So LightRiver is predominantly a North American country, or a North American company. So I can't speak a great deal to the other geographies. What I can say in North America, it's a little bit fascinating to me. If you look at the overall business cycles, in the early 2000s, we were doing some migration to Ethernet in a number of the services, trying to move away from the traditional T1s, T3s type of model. We were migrating from up to gig Ethernet. 1 gig was the big push, and then through the mid 2000s, early 2000s, we were going to 10 gig. We saw a little bit of a bump in the overall build cycle around 10 gig. People migrating from OC48 to OC192, from 1 gig to 10 gig, and right now what we're seeing is there's a tremendous explosion. Almost everybody has now reached the 10 gig is my port of choice business model. Even smaller enterprises are now taking a 10 gig pipe just in case. They might only use 1 gig today, but just in case, it's easier to ramp that 10 gig port up rather than deliver a whole new CPE device to the premises. So in the carrier world, if I'm delivering 10 gig services and I make my money out of aggregating smaller pipes into bigger pipes and working on an economy of scale, yeah, everybody today we're talking to is looking at 100 gig minimum in their networks. We're putting in 100 gig everywhere. A couple of years ago, we had some predictions. We were going to, in terms of numbers of 100 gig trials and networks that we've been putting together, and we doubled and tripled that number, and that trend has continued even into this year and next year, what we're looking at for projects. Everybody's looking at 100 gig. They've already started talking 200 gig, and we're very close to looking at terabyte-sized waves in these networks as a regular basis within a couple of years. We're at the start, I think, of this next kind of quantum leap in bandwidth, and that's a build cycle in North America that could add significantly to the overall, the world build. It looks very exciting from the North American perspective. I can say that.
All right, thank you very much, Dean. And Roy?
The easy part of the question: fastest growth in Asia Pacific, America, and Europe. And I have a final prediction, 2 final predictions. One is the future isn't out there waiting for us. We're actually making the future. the people on this call, the people watching this call, all of our colleagues, we're slowly, in incremental ways, making it. Dean moves towards 100G, looking at faster than 100G. Charlie has his things. All of the things that we're doing in one small step move forward. We actually create the future. The future isn't something you drive along and suddenly hit it. My other part is, and it's a personal thing, nobody can predict the future. But if I had to predict the future, I would say it's based on the Ethernet. That's my personal prediction.
Roy, thank you very much. And Charlie, you have the final say.
Well, I appreciate that I'm part of the team that makes the future. I think that you guys actually making the equipment are doing a bigger part than us, making forecasts and sizing things. But from our view, on the geography side, I would second, we do see a lot of growth in Asia Pacific, North America, and Europe has a lot of transition, despite the economic growth not as much. And then I'd add that developing countries continue to, across the board, we see a lot of growth. It's pretty small as far as the bandwidth they have right now. But, when you talk about the subsea landing points and different stuff like that, you're going to see a lot of growth in optical transport there. Final prediction. There's not a lot I can say that hasn't been hit on already with the final predictions. I think I would agree that this is a pivotal time, that there's a lot of impetus for change right now with the bandwidth upgrades. I think that, we're at a point where people are just 100% off of legacy networks and making the move quickly. On the equipment side, you see that long past. We look at the transport side. There's still some space to go, but it's going to happen at a more rapid pace the next couple of years. And then I think from an innovation standpoint, just with the proliferation of the cloud, which still has a lot of room to grow, the amount of data that's going to be added, the amount of servers that are currently sitting in offices that can go in the cloud, give it a lot of space to grow, and the companies that are managing it are sitting on huge pools of cash and brain power, as well as the equipment players, and serve them and serve the carriers between them. And that is going to really push the innovation of networking, which is sexy again, or more so than usual. So I do expect some changes. I expect a big turn in bandwidth demand, and as this happens, there's going to be some huge adjustments in who the big market players are and who's making money and who's not. But overall, the industry should remain healthy.
Outstanding. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for being here today. We expect to continue this conversation among many others at the Telecom Exchange event coming up on June 24th, in a couple of months here. So we'll be sure to continue the conversation, and we'll see you then. And thank you, viewers, for watching JSA TV, and happy networking.